We threw my birthday party at your house without asking. 87 people, and charged everything to your account. $31,400, sister texted with a cake emoji. I found out when my cleaning lady called. Your house is destroyed. I drove home, took 200 photos, sent them to one email address. When the insurance assessor arrived and listed sister's name as the responsible party, I picked up the pen because that was what I had done for my sister my entire adult life. If Vanessa cried, I paid. If my parents were in a bind, I transferred money. If somebody in the family said the words, "just this once," I already knew my banking app would be open before the call ended. So yes, when the waiter set the silver pen beside my plate at my sister's rehearsal dinner, my hand moved on instinct. Then I looked at the paper. Co-borrower agreement. Not a guest book page, not some sentimental wedding surprise, not a symbolic signature for a keepsake frame. A legal document tying me to a $310,000 mortgage. There were 40 people in that private room. Candlelight, white roses, crystal glasses, place cards with gold script. The kind of expensive, polished setting that made everything uglier once the truth was sitting on the table. Vanessa stood at the front in a fitted ivory dress, one hand resting on a velvet box she had used to hide the packet. Her fiancé Grant stood beside her, with that smug, over-rehearsed groom smile that never reached his eyes. My mother was glowing, 2 tables away, like she personally had arranged the moon, the flowers, and the violinist in the hallway. My father already looked flushed from the bar. Half the guests were family, the other half Grant's people, all dressed for a nice, emotional evening. My son Nolan sat beside me in a tiny navy blazer, shoulders drawn up, fingers worrying the edge of his napkin. My daughter Ivy, 13 and too smart to miss anything, had gone very still on my other side. Vanessa lifted the pages and smiled at the room. Before dessert, she said, I wanted to do one more meaningful thing with family. A few people made those soft, happy sounds guests make when they think a bride is about to announce something sweet. Then she looked straight at me. Lorraine, she said, bright as glass, your wedding gift to us is helping us close on our house. A couple people laughed because they thought she was joking. She wasn't. All you have to do is sign tonight, she went on. The lender needs it first thing tomorrow. And honestly, if you say no now, you're basically saying you're not family. That line hit the room before anybody reacted. I felt it move through the tables like a cold draft. My mother leaned forward and said, Don't make this awkward, Lorraine. My father didn't even bother lowering his voice. You're the only one with the income and credit for it. Sign and be done. I remember every detail of the next few seconds. The floral smell, the tiny knock of someone's fork against china, Grant's hand tightening around his champagne glass, Nolan looking from the paper to my face and going quiet in that awful, careful way children do when they realize adults are doing something cruel in public. That was the real moment, not the mortgage, not the amount. My son shrinking beside me because my family had once again decided his mother was useful, but not worthy of respect. I picked up the pen. Vanessa smiled wider. Across the room, somebody whispered, knew she'd come through. Then I read the first page again. Slow. Clean. Accountant slow. Borrower liability. Joint responsibility. Default exposure. I put the pen back down, stood up, and said, very clearly, actually, no. The entire room stopped. Vanessa blinked once, like I had spoken in the wrong language. What? No, I said again. Her face cracked. Lorraine, are you serious right now? Yes. You are not doing this at my rehearsal dinner. I looked at the papers, then at her, then at my son. You shouldn't have brought mortgage papers to your rehearsal dinner. Her voice turned sharp and loud. You're ruining my wedding. That was when I said the line I had not planned until that exact second. Check your venue contract. Grant moved first. Not much, just a tiny stiffening through the shoulders. Vanessa caught it, turned to look at him, then back at me. My mother half rose from her chair. Lorraine? I kept my voice even. The $34,000 deposit? The one you forgot I paid? The one the contract still ties to my billing authority? I would read the cancellation clause before you decide I'm the one making a scene. Vanessa's face drained all at once. Grant said, "You wouldn't." I looked straight at him. "You should have thought of that before making me part of your closing package in front of 40 people. I'm Lorraine Mercer. I was 42, chief accountant for a large regional retail company with more stores than I cared to count and executives who trusted me to spot risk before it swallowed a quarter. I lived outside Columbus with my 2 kids, a manageable mortgage, 1 reliable Honda, and a life I had rebuilt after divorce, line by line, payment by payment, without asking my family for a cent. That should have mattered more than it did. Instead, what mattered to them was that I was solvent, dependable, calm, the one who always found a way. My mother called me responsible. My father called me successful. Vanessa called me blessed. What they all meant was usable. The mortgage ambush did not come out of nowhere. Nothing like that ever does. It was just the first time they had been bold enough to do in public what they had been doing in private for years. The pattern started after my divorce, when I got promoted twice in 4 years and finally had enough breathing room to stop panicking over every car repair and dentist bill. My parents treated my stability like a community resource. Vanessa treated it like a loyalty test. It began with small asks. My parents' furnace gave out one January during a brutal cold snap. I paid $7,600 because my father said the house was unbearable, and my mother started crying over the phone about her joints. Then came my mother's dental work, $2,100 for a crown and follow-up because insurance wasn't covering what it should. Vanessa maxed out 2 credit cards after what she called a temporary rough patch. I paid $4,800 to stop the interest from crushing her because she swore she would pay me back by summer. She didn't. Grant lost his job for a stretch after that, and suddenly there were groceries, gas, 1 overdue utility bill, then rent support. Just to bridge them, just while he interviews, just until payroll catches up. That word, just, followed every transfer out of my account. At some point, because I am who I am, I started tracking everything. Not to shame them, not at first. To keep the facts straight. Accountants know memory is the first thing people weaponize when money gets emotional. So I built a spreadsheet, quietly. Every transfer, every payment, every so-called temporary rescue. Date, amount, reason. Whether repayment had been promised, whether it had actually happened. By the time Vanessa got engaged, the total sat at $93,120. I wish I were exaggerating. But money becomes strangely easy to lose track of when it leaves in pieces. $400 here, $1,100 there. A charge put on my card. A deposit I front because somebody is embarrassed. A recurring transfer I mean to stop after 1 month and somehow don't stop for 14. The worst part was that while I was bankrolling comfort, my children were still being treated like afterthoughts. That was the piece that kept me awake more than the numbers. My kids were never loud, difficult, or disrespectful. Nolan was quiet, observant, and painfully eager to be polite. Ivy had a sharper edge, but only because she noticed everything and refused to lie to herself about it. They were good kids. Easy to love if you wanted to. My family just didn't want to enough. At Christmas 2 years earlier, my mother hung embroidered stockings for every grandchild across the mantle. Vanessa's daughters had matching velvet ones. My brother Neil's son had one with little silver snowflakes. There was even a stocking for the baby Neil's wife was pregnant with, because my mother thought that was adorable. Nothing for Nolan, nothing for Ivy. When Nolan asked where ours were, my mother smiled and said, "Oh, honey, I figured you 2 were old enough not to care." He was 10, Ivy was 12. At Easter, the cousins each got pastel gift bags with watercolor name tags, books, candy, and movie vouchers. Nolan and Ivy got 2 generic chocolate rabbits from the pantry after my mother realized she had come up short. At a family barbecue, my father lined up the grandchildren for a photo and actually said, "Let's do the main group first," then posed the others without my kids. At Vanessa's bridal shower, Ivy handed over a recipe book she had made by hand, with pressed flowers and dividers and little notes in the margins. Vanessa smiled for the room, then set it aside unopened while squealing over a designer mixer from Grant's aunt. Later, I found Ivy's book under a chair, with a heel mark across the cover. I kept telling myself it was thoughtlessness, not malice, not deliberate, just bad habits, old family patterns. The kind of thing I could manage if I stayed gracious and kept showing up. But the thing about repeated exclusions is that children notice the repetition long before adults stop explaining it away. 3 months before the wedding, Vanessa called me sobbing because the venue deposit was due and she and Grant had their down payment money temporarily tied up. She said losing the date would destroy everything. Invitations were already out, vendors were booked, Grant's family would never let it go. She had worked too hard to lose this place. I knew I should say no. I knew it while she was still talking. Then she said the sentence she had used on me in one form or another since we were teenagers. You always save us. So I wired $34,000 from my reserve account, my emergency fund, the money I had built for actual emergencies, my house, my children, something real. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself she would sign a repayment plan after the wedding. I told myself family was complicated and love was expensive, and sometimes being the stable one meant carrying more than your share. Then she stood up at her rehearsal dinner and told 40 people that if I would not co-sign a house, I was not family. The room around me at that moment felt both silent and too bright. Vanessa took a step toward me. This is unbelievable. No, I said, this is overdue. Grant tried for calm. Lorraine, everybody's emotional. I turned to him. You brought debt papers to my dinner plate. We were desperate. Desperate people ask privately. My father shoved his chair back. There she goes, Miss Accountant. Everything is a transaction with her. I looked at him. That would be rich, even if it weren't stupid. A few heads snapped toward me. Good. I was tired of being the only person in the room expected to stay polished. My mother hissed, Lorraine. But I was done helping her preserve appearances. I said, you all seem confused about what family means. Family is not threatening someone into 6 figures of liability because she has a good credit score. Vanessa slapped one hand against the table. You picked up the pen. Yes, I said. And then I remembered I have children sitting here. That landed harder than anything else. Because people had seen Nolan. They had seen Ivy staring at her plate. They had seen exactly how ugly this was. Vanessa looked around like she expected the room to rescue her. So what, you're just going to walk out? I slid the papers back across the table. Yes. If you leave, don't bother coming tomorrow. I met her eyes. If the only time I count as family is when your bills come due, then no, I won't be there. I touched Nolan's shoulder. Get your jacket. He stood immediately. Ivy was already reaching for her bag. We walked out past white roses, polished silver, and 40 people who had just watched my sister try to purchase obedience with shame. Nobody stopped us. In the hallway outside, Nolan asked quietly, Mom, were they making you buy their house? I crouched so I was eye level with him. They were trying to make me promise to pay if they couldn't. He frowned. That's not a wedding present. No, I said. It isn't. Ivy hit the elevator button hard. You should pull the deposit. I looked at her. She held my stare. I mean it. That was Ivy. No patience for fake peace. No interest in being noble for people who kept hurting us politely. In the elevator, my phone started vibrating. Vanessa. Mom. Dad. Grant. Vanessa again. I let them all ring. By the time we got back to the hotel, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Not because I wanted revenge, because boundaries only matter when they cost something to the people who keep crossing them. For my family, the only language they never ignored was money. I ordered room service for the kids, got them settled, then opened my laptop on the desk by the window. The contract folder was still in my email because Vanessa had never bothered changing the billing contact after I paid the deposit. My name was still attached to the venue funding. Carelessness mixed with entitlement, a familiar combination. I reread the contract from top to bottom. There it was. Funding authority could be withdrawn before midnight by the contracting payer, with penalties. The event could still proceed if the clients covered the remaining balance and executed new payment responsibility. I stared at that paragraph for maybe 10 seconds. Then I called the venue. The night manager sounded tired, in the way people in hospitality sound when rich families are collapsing under floral arrangements. I verified my identity, verified my authority, requested the withdrawal form. He sent it while I was still on the phone. I signed at 10:47 p.m. One clean move. That was all. I did not send threats. I did not write a dramatic family text. I did not call Vanessa back and tell her to beg. I withdrew my funding from the event she had decided could survive my humiliation. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark hotel room with the screen glow dying on the desk. At 11:18, the first voicemail came in. Vanessa, furious and crying at the same time. How could you? What is wrong with you? Grant's parents are asking questions. The venue says there's an issue. You always do this, Lorraine. You always need control. I deleted it. At 11:36, my father called 3 times in a row. At 11:52, my mother texted, "Reverse this stunt immediately." At 11:57, Grant wrote, "We need to handle this like adults." That one almost made me laugh. Midnight passed. I slept badly, but I slept. At 6:09 the next morning, somebody started pounding on my hotel door. My father, of course. I opened it with the safety latch still fastened. He looked terrible, hair damp, shirt wrinkled, rage stretched over panic. "What did you do?" "Good morning," I said. "Don't start with me." My mother stood beside him, gripping her handbag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind them, one of Vanessa's bridesmaids hovered at the end of the hall, pretending she was not listening. I said, "You shouldn't be here." He ignored that. "The venue says payment authority was pulled." "Yes." My mother made a shocked little noise, as if consequences had wandered in from nowhere and startled her personally. "Lorraine," she said, "you cannot do this on her wedding day." I looked at her. "She did something on her rehearsal dinner." That was different. It wasn't. My father jabbed a finger through the gap in the door. "You are punishing your sister over one stupid moment." "No," I said. "I'm done funding all of you." That stopped him for a second. My mother moved in with the softer voice she used when she wanted me back inside my old role. "Sweetheart, everybody was stressed." I wasn't. She didn't mean it. She prepared documents. She was scared. So was my son. That one finally landed. Her eyes flicked past me into the room as if she had forgotten there were children attached to this situation at all. From behind me, Ivy said, "We're not going." My mother's face changed instantly, trying on concern. "Ivy, honey." "Don't," Ivy said. One word, flat, controlled, more effective than a speech. My father threw up his hands. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said. "This is accurate." He stared at me, then asked the question that told me everything I needed to know about how he understood the world. "How much do you want?" Not an apology, not "what do you need," not "how do we fix this?" How much? As if this was a price negotiation, as if everything about me, from my patience to my love, could be reduced to terms. I said, "Leave." My mother started crying then. Real or strategic, I did not care. "Family shouldn't work like this," she said. I looked at her for a long second. Exactly. Then I shut the door. By 8:30, the messages were coming in waves. Vanessa called me evil. Grant said I was humiliating them. My father called me selfish. Neil texted, "Call Mom. This has gone too far." I replied, "It went too far years ago." He sent nothing back. At 10:14, the venue emailed to confirm the event would proceed. Grant's parents had stepped in with emergency payment support. A line of credit covered the rest. The wedding was intact. Good. I had not wanted a destroyed wedding. I wanted my money and my name out of it. That distinction mattered to me, even if nobody else cared. I took Nolan and Ivy to my Aunt Celia's house instead of the ceremony. Celia was my mother's older sister, divorced, blunt, and completely uninterested in family mythology. She lived in a brick ranch with wind chimes on the porch and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and toast. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and hugged my children first. That alone nearly made me pray. When I told her what happened, she closed her eyes for a second and said, "She did that in public?" "Yes." Celia shook her head slowly. "I knew your sister was shameless. I did not know she was stupid." Ivy laughed then. A short, surprised burst, the first real sound out of her since the dinner. We spent the wedding day at Celia's kitchen table, eating grilled cheese and tomato soup while my phone kept buzzing itself sick. My cousin Mara texted, "For what it's worth, half the guests think Vanessa lost her mind." Then another, "Also, people know you paid the deposit." She badly misjudged the room. That mattered, because people like Vanessa count on privacy. They count on the family system closing around them. They count on shame keeping the useful person quiet. Public ugliness had broken that protection. The next night, after the wedding photos were already going up online with white roses and perfect smiles and no sign of the mess underneath, I opened my spreadsheet. Every transfer, every rescue, every invoice, every just until next month. Every moment I had mistaken my usefulness for being loved. The total, with the venue deposit included, sat at $127,120. I stared at it until my eyes watered. That was not generosity anymore. That was a second life I could have built for my children. A better emergency fund. A larger college cushion. A kitchen renovation. Breathing room. I closed the spreadsheet and made one promise to myself. No more private subsidies for people who publicly diminished my children. The fallout came exactly the way it always does when a dependable person stops cooperating. First anger, then guilt, then rewriting. My mother called and said I had embarrassed the family. I said, "You embarrassed yourselves." My father wrote that I had changed. I replied, "No, I stopped paying." Vanessa tried 3 different versions of the same argument. First tears, then rage, then softness. She texted, "I can't believe you would do this during the happiest weekend of my life." I wrote back, "You brought mortgage papers to my plate." She responded, "You always make everything about the kids." I stared at that line for a long moment. Then I typed, "That is because I am their mother." After that, I blocked her. Neil came by 4 days later with gas station coffee and the face of a man drafted into a war he wanted no part of. He stood in my kitchen while Nolan worked on homework and Ivy pretended not to listen from the hallway. "Mom says you've cut everybody off." "I have." He rubbed his thumb against the coffee sleeve. "Even them?" I almost smiled. "Who did you think I meant?" He looked embarrassed. "She said you were emotional." "Did she mention the mortgage papers?" He didn't answer right away. That told me enough. When he finally sat down, I pulled up the spreadsheet and turned the screen toward him. He stared at the final total. Then he looked at me like he was seeing something he had avoided seeing for years. "I didn't know it was that much." "I know. That's insane." "Yes." He exhaled hard. "Dad says you owe the family loyalty." I looked at him. "I gave them $127,000. That shut him up. A minute later he asked, quieter, "You really won't help them again?" "No." He glanced toward Nolan in the next room. For the first time in that whole conversation, he looked ashamed. Before he left, he said, "For what it's worth, the kids shouldn't have been put in that room for something like this." "No," I said, "they shouldn't." It wasn't a real apology, but it was the closest thing I got from my immediate family. And honestly, by then, I had stopped needing one. The strangest thing after all of it was how quickly my own house changed once their hands were out of my accounts. Not richer, steadier. The pressure went out of the walls. I replaced the dishwasher I had been postponing for a year because there was always some family emergency more urgent. I signed Ivy up for the Saturday art workshop she had wanted forever. I bought Nolan the good cleats instead of the almost right pair. I said yes to a weekend trip in the fall instead of keeping that money sitting around in case Vanessa had another disaster. That is what boundaries buy at first. Not luxury. Room. The first holiday season after the wedding was the real test. My mother sent a group text in November as if nothing had happened. Thanksgiving at 3, bring wine. No apology, no acknowledgement, just expectation. I wrote back, "We won't be there." She called immediately. I let it ring. Then she texted, "Don't punish everyone forever." I replied, "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting my children." That was the last thing I said on the subject. So we made our own Thanksgiving. Small, quiet, better. Celia came. Mara came. My next-door neighbor Ruth brought sweet potatoes and stayed longer than planned. Nolan made place cards in messy block letters. Ivy put rosemary in little jars down the center of the table because she said our dining room looked like a tax office and needed help. At one point, Nolan knocked over his cider, and 3 people reached for napkins without anybody sighing, snapping, or acting like he had ruined something. It sounds tiny. It wasn't. Children notice ease, too. Christmas was even clearer. I bought a real tree for the first time in years. Not the practical choice, the right one. Nolan wanted the smell of pine. Ivy said fake trees looked emotionally dishonest. We decorated it with everything we actually loved. School ornaments, salt dough stars, a ceramic fox Nolan painted in 3rd grade, the ugly paper angel Ivy made when she was 6 and still insisted was abstract. No matching theme, no child missing. On Christmas Eve, while cinnamon rolls were rising in the kitchen and Celia and Mara argued over cards in the living room, Nolan came downstairs carrying a little cardboard box. He set it on the table in front of me. Inside were 2 preschool ornaments I had not seen in years. His crooked photo frame one, and Ivy's popsicle stick snowflake with too much silver paint. I knew exactly what they were. The ornaments my mother had forgotten to put on her tree. "Where did you get these?" I asked. Nolan said, "Aunt Celia found them in Grandma's hall closet." Celia, from the other room, called out, "They seemed lonely." I laughed, then almost cried. I hung both ornaments on our tree right then. Ivy stepped over and adjusted hers because it was crooked. Then she looked at the tree, the room, the mess of wrapping paper, the people who had shown up without making us earn it, and said, "I like this better." "Better than what?" I asked. "Better than pretending." That was the real ending. Not Vanessa's blocked number, not the wedding photos, not the recovered portion of my deposit eventually landing back in my account. That sentence. Better than pretending. Because that was what I had finally stopped doing. Pretending money made us close. Pretending repeated slights were accidents. Pretending my children did not notice who got counted and who did not. Pretending my calm meant I could carry anything without cost. A month later, Vanessa showed up in the lobby of my office. Not at my house, at work, which was so perfectly her that I almost admired the consistency. My assistant messaged that my sister was downstairs, insisting it was urgent family business. I stepped out because I wasn't going to let her create a show for my staff. She stood in a cream coat, too light for the weather, jaw tight, eyes already bright with anger. "We need to talk." "No," I said. "You can't just erase me over one bad night." I looked at her for a long second. Then I said, "It wasn't one night. It was years." She folded her arms. "Grant's parents had to cover things because of you. Do you know how humiliating that was?" I said, "Now you know." She flinched, not because she understood, because nobody had ever reflected the humiliation back to her before. I kept my voice level. "You are not getting money from me again. No loans, no deposits, no signatures, no co-signing, nothing." She stared at me. "So that's it?" I said the cleanest sentence I had learned through all of this. "I'm not your backup bank." Security walked her out when she refused to move. I went back upstairs and finished a budget review 15 minutes later. That mattered to me more than I expected. Not the security, the returning. The fact that my life no longer had to stop every time my family decided to turn me into an ATM with feelings. There were still consequences. There always are. My father told relatives I had become cold. My mother told people I was letting my divorce make me bitter. Vanessa told anyone who would listen that I had sabotaged her wedding. Maybe in her version I had. In mine, I simply removed my money from a performance that required my humiliation to continue. And I chose my children in a room where they had been expected to watch me surrender one more time. That is the part I keep. Not the shouting, not the contract, not even the number. The image of Nolan beside me, napkin twisted in his hands, waiting to see what his mother would do. I am grateful he saw me put the pen down. I am grateful Ivy saw that no can be calm and still final. I am grateful I learned, even late, that peace bought with your children's dignity is not peace at all. It is rent, and I had been paying too much of it for too long. So here's the truth I ended with. Family is not whoever feels entitled to your rescue. Love is not public pressure with flowers around it, And a boundary does not become cruel just because the people losing access call it that. I did not ruin my sister's wedding. I ruined her assumption that I would always sign. That was the only thing I truly took away, and it was already mine.